So of course we're not saying we have 6 minds. There's only one mind. But that mind we can look at from these 6 perspectives. What we can say, of course, is the aspect of the mind that perceives visual objects, we call that visual consciousness. The aspect of our mind that perceives sounds is auditory consciousness, and so on. The aspect of our mind that perceives thoughts, emotions, memories, and so forth is mental consciousness. And what we notice, the difference between these two is, or one difference is, the 5 sense consciousnesses are non-conceptual, meaning my visual consciousness directly perceives the object. Whereas the mental consciousness is conceptual. For example, when I look there, my visual consciousness sees cup. Technically, my visual consciousness is simply seeing a collection of colours and shapes there. But then my mental consciousness goes, I know what that is, that's a cup. So we know that through the concept cup. So therefore the mental consciousness is conceptual. And so that's what's being said here, is that in daily life, whatever is appearing, whether it's simply to the sense consciousnesses or to the mental consciousness, we are to investigate how are all these things appearing. And it says, through such investigation, the way in which they actually exist as dependent arisings without an independent essence will then dawn nakedly and vividly. So what that's saying is that, and this is what's called illusory-like emptiness practice, is in daily life we are to question appearances. So whatever's appearing, sensory, mental, have a look. How is that appearing? And that cup, for example, is appearing as if it existed independent of me. However, due to my understanding of emptiness and my experience of emptiness in meditation, I know that that appearance is deceptive. And that actually that cup does not exist independently. In fact, that cup is a dependent arising. That cup only exists within my conceptual framework. And so that's what we see here, that that will dawn nakedly and vividly, that they exist as dependent arisings. But of course that will only happen if we have an understanding of emptiness, and particularly if we have a little taste of emptiness to validate that, and through questioning appearances. Because if we don't have an understanding of emptiness, and we're not questioning appearances, then that cup will definitely seem like, and we will accept that it exists there independent of us.
And then therefore, anger and jealousy and
exactly.
That is my cup.
Yeah.
Regarding the mental consciousness, do all mental consciousnesses are conceptual? There's direct one
as well. In fact, that's what we're doing in the emptiness meditation, is initially, and we mentioned this earlier, and I think it actually came up in the text, is when we first have an experience of emptiness, in that experience there's still a sense of me experiencing this thing, emptiness. And so that's a very conceptual experience. In the text, I think it used the word generic image, which just means a conceptual image. So we will realise emptiness. It's a valid experience, but we realise it through a conceptual image. Like normally, we will understand cup through the concept cup. But in this emptiness meditation, with shamatha, we can go beyond that and we can come to a direct realisation of emptiness, non-conceptual.
Still mental.
Mental, of course, yeah, mental, yeah.
I just want to ask if it's worth using the 5 sense consciousness in order to perceive directly without a mental concept, just seeing, or just feeling without any mental concept attached.
Exactly. So that can be very helpful as a daily life practice, and even as a meditation, is just look, like for example, just observe that cup and just be in the practice of the direct perception of that cup and drop away any of that labeling and conception. And that can really help us to see, well, it's just colours and shapes. It's just colours and shapes. And actually it's my conceptual mind that is interpreting that and creating cup and giving the name cup. So yes, that can be very helpful to support the idea of labelling. Because if we just really look there directly, I mean, all it really is, and sometimes, you know, you can have that experience is that if you're really looking at some visual object and the mind is going quiet, sometimes you'll get to the, maybe many of you had this experience, you look and you go, what's that? Because then it's just like, it's just some sort of colour and shape. And that happens a lot for me for words. You know, you see a word and you know that's a word, but then if you just sort of let the mind go quiet and you just look, suddenly it's a collection of letters, and suddenly then it's just some squiggly lines, and you sort of go, what's that? And then that's very helpful in understanding it's just squiggly lines, and that we're interpreting that in a meaning to make sense, and we give it a label, you know, word, letter. So that can be very helpful.
But this makes me scared when you say it and I really imagine it. It creates fear of losing my mind, of going crazy.
What does?
The subject of emptiness.
Yes, because we're stuck in the two extremes. Because emptiness is letting go of the extreme of existence. And then we've sort of got no grounding because we think that then there's nothing. Because the only thing we're holding on to is independent existence. That's why fear is very common. That's why to overcome fear, we need to receive teachings on this, we need to reflect on it, we need to contemplate, to, as what we're really going to say here now, and we've mentioned a bit before, to really understand that holding on to this reality we're believing in is actually the source of all of our suffering. And if we just let go of that, we're not going to go into some oblivion or go crazy or go out of existence. We'll be liberated. And so if we appreciate that, then instead of this thinking, I'm going to go crazy, I don't exist or whatever, we'll have a lot of joy. But if you don't do that, then that can happen. And that's why we said at the beginning, right at the beginning of the text, in this section of Vipassana, it said something like, in order to directly realise selflessness, it is necessary to meditate having first determined selflessness through hearing and contemplating. If we don't do that, then yes, we can just get completely unhinged. And this happens to a lot of people. They maybe just somehow through whatever mechanism, and this happens a lot, something happens and that causes some sort of, you know, there's maybe some strong stimulus, and then they just have this sort of releasing experience, and they don't know how to interpret it, and they freak out. And that's very common. They freak out because they think I'm going crazy, I don't really exist, all these sort of things. So therefore, if we just receive teachings, we think about it, we reflect on it, then when we have these experiences, we'll interpret them correctly, and then we can really understand that this is the pathway to liberation. So this is important. Because often people go, I don't want to study, I just want to meditate. And then they get into all sorts of trouble. Because they have certain experiences, they don't know how to interpret them, they interpret them in a wrong way, and then they think they're going crazy, they're going out of existence, and so on. So that's why it's good to have a qualified teacher, receive instructions, follow the instructions. If you have some experience, talk to the teacher, they can say, yes, that's good, no, that's spacing out, do this, do that. And then that's a very systematic way of moving forward. But also, people, you know, we have craving and attachment for a lot of things. And here, in meditation, people just want to have an experience. Give me an experience. I need an mystic experience. No. I mean, it's just another craving. So let's do it methodically and systematically so that it actually can help us to overcome mental afflictions and suffering, rather than just getting caught up in some sort of spacious experience that doesn't lead us anywhere. Okay. So if we continue on, it says here, through realising that, your ascertainment of the ultimate nature, that is emptiness, will increase. So what it's saying here is that through investigating appearances in daily life and coming to see they do not exist as they appear, in fact they are only existing within conceptual framework, they're merely labelled, that will deepen our appreciation and understanding of emptiness. So you'll find that your daily life, illusory-like emptiness practice will feed back into your meditation. You can go deeper in the meditation, then go deeper in daily life, so they'll feed each other. And that's what it says here in this quote, recognising whatever dawns is the essential point of view. So recognising that whatever is appearing is mere as a dependent arising is the essential point of the view of emptiness. That's the flip side of emptiness. In brief, do not grasp on to any of those things which appear to you, even your own mind. Constantly sustain your practice by alternating the space-like meditative equipoise of ascertaining the way in which they actually exist with the post-meditation of the undeniable dawning of dependently related agents and actions. So what it's saying here is that to have an effective emptiness practice, we need both the meditation, what's called space-like practice, with the daily life, illusory-like practice, and we need to keep alternating that. So meditate, daily life, backwards and forwards, alternating. And they'll feed each other. And so we are to alternate that, and remember the post-meditation is seeing everything as dependent arising, as a functioning world. It says dependently related agents and actions. So the measure that we're doing the daily life practice well is that we are not negating causality. If our illusory-like practice is leading us to sort of think, well, there's nothing functioning, there's no causality, then we're going astray. So it should be actually deepening our appreciation of functioning world of causality. And then it says, through knowing how to sustain meditative equipoise and post-meditation in this way, it is necessary to familiarise yourself in meditative equipoise, having unified the ultimate nature of all phenomena of samsara and nirvana as indivisibly one, and in post-meditation to familiarise yourself having unified their conventional nature as being illusory-like mere appearances. So again, in meditative equipoise, in meditation, it says to unify ultimate nature of all phenomena as indivisibly one. Means to come to realise in meditation that everything is empty of independent existence. No matter what we are focusing on, everything is indivisibly one nature. Here we need to be careful in terms of terminology. You know, we mentioned that we're sort of stuck in this dualistic world. There seems to be independent me, independent world there. And emptiness is realising there's no duality, but then often people mistakenly say, therefore we are all one. No, we're not all one. One means same. So duality or non-duality is beyond same and different. Duality means big and small. So non-duality does not mean one. One would mean big and small are the same. Big and small are definitely not the same. They're not one. So actually the word in Tibetan literally is things are not two. Not two. Not two does not equal one. One is dualistic. You can only have one if there's two. So you can't say something affirmative. You can only say it through negation. Non-dual, not two. You can't say one. What you can say is as here, everything's of one nature. Of course, everything's one nature in emptiness, but you can't say everything's one. That's still dualistic way of speaking. And then he's quoting here Aryadeva is the main disciple of Nagarjuna, and this I think is coming from his 400 verses on emptiness text. He says, whoever is the seer of one thing, they are said to be the seer of all. That which is the emptiness of one, that is the emptiness of all. Meaning, if we come to realise emptiness of one thing, we'll realise the emptiness of everything. This is what's being said here. And he says, in that way, it is true that from the perspective of a correct meditative equipoise upon the ultimate nature, in other words, from the perspective of a mind realising emptiness in meditation, there is freedom from the elaborations of the extremes of existence and non-existence and so forth with respect to samsara and nirvana. Meaning that when we are meditating and we're directly realising emptiness, nothing else is appearing. That's what it means here by elaborations of extremes of existence and non-existence. That we've gone beyond those two extremes of existence and non-existence. Nothing else is appearing in meditation except emptiness. But then he says, however, after arising from that meditative equipoise, when you investigate, it is undeniable that there are dependently related agents and actions that exist as being merely imputed by name, and they naturally dawn as being like a dream, like a mirage, like a reflection of a moon in the water, and like an illusion. So what he's saying, of course, is that in that meditation, when we're realising emptiness, even though then nothing else is appearing, of course that doesn't mean now that nothing exists. Because when we come out of meditation, we'll see actually everything is there as a dependent arising, that everything exists within a conceptual framework, merely imputed by name. And then using these analogies of examples of a dream, which we already covered, mirage, reflection of moon in water, like an illusion. And it says they naturally dawn. Naturally dawn means that now, of course, in daily life, things don't naturally dawn as like a dream. Things naturally dawn as existing independent of us. But if we meditate on emptiness and we come to experience and realise emptiness, then that experience of emptiness is still going to affect our mind a little bit after the meditation. So while it's still affecting our mind, then those things will appear like a dream. Because even though they will still appear to exist independent of us, because now our mind is affected by that emptiness, we'll really directly see that does not exist as it appears, because it's like a dream. It's like an illusion. And that will happen naturally because of the effect of the emptiness.
What does it mean that in emptiness nothing appears and only afterwards it appears like a dream? Because emptiness is emptiness of inherent existence.
Right. So that's why it's called space-like emptiness practice. Like, let's say we're looking for the me. And we're looking. If we get to the point of not finding, that experience of not finding is an experience of absence, isn't it?
It's absent
of a findable me.
Of the findable leader.
So your experience is an experience of absence.
Absence of false thing, not absence of...
Yeah, but the only thing we were looking for in that case was the me. So it's an absence of me. So that experience is a experience of negation. So, for example, if we're looking for a person in a room, then we're looking at people, and if we get to the point of realising they're not in the room, that realisation, that experience, is an experience of absence. That's all in that experience that it's appearing, is there's absence, negation. That's why it's called space-like. Because we are realising through negation, through not finding. Okay. So if we continue on a little bit, this is a point we covered before, but it's very important, so let's go through that again now. at the bottom of the last two paragraphs of page 12, it says, when emptiness is not obscured by appearances. And of course, emptiness is obscured by appearances now, because those appearances are suggesting to us that actually things exist independently. So that's obscuring emptiness. And when appearances are not blocked by emptiness, at that time the excellent path of emptiness and dependent arisings being equivalent becomes manifest. Being equivalent, again, is the idea that emptiness and dependent arising are two sides of a coin. They're equivalent, same meaning. So basically, when we get to the point where appearances are not blocking our appreciation of emptiness, and emptiness is not somehow negating appearances, but actually they're reinforcing each other. So appearances are confirming to us emptiness, and emptiness is confirming to us appearances, then we've come to a good understanding of emptiness, the view of emptiness. And here's a quote from Tsongkhapa, who says, as long as the assertions of appearances being undeceiving dependent arisings and emptiness are understood to be two separate things, that's the case for us, there either seems to be a functioning independent world there, or everything's empty and doesn't really exist. They seem to be contradictory. As long as they appear individually, you have still not understood the intent of the sage. The sage is another word for Buddha. When, without alternating, as soon as the ascertaining consciousness merely sees dependent arisings as non-deceptive, and all modes of grasping to the object are destroyed, then your investigation of the view is complete. Meaning that soon as we see something, we ascertain something, that ascertaining immediately destroys our grasping of it as independent, then our view of emptiness is complete. Now, of course, as soon as we ascertain something, see something, we grasp. But when we get to the point where that mere ascertainment leads to, due to understanding, therefore, that that is merely labelled, that will drop all grasping to that as independent, then our view of emptiness is complete. That we understand that dependent arisings, functioning world, and emptiness are two sides of a coin. And there's another quote here from Nagarjuna who says, someone who through understanding the emptiness of phenomena sees cause and effect as tenable, this is more amazing than amazing. This is more marvellous than marvellous. So what Nagarjuna is saying here is that to be able to hold in one mind the idea of emptiness and the idea of functioning world or causality, to hold that in one mind, that is amazing, because that is the true understanding of emptiness. That emptiness means functioning world. Functioning world means emptiness. And that really is the measure of our emptiness practice really going very well. Is that if our experience of emptiness is confirming to us a functioning world, and a functioning world for us is confirming, therefore everything's empty, then that's the measure. Any questions? Okay. One last question? Yeah.
It's based on my not remembering everything. This question. Ariadeva, when he says that which is emptiness of one, that is the emptiness of all, he begins with which tenet? Because
this is Mahamudra.
Each time you go, you look for emptiness of self, and then you look for emptiness of phenomena. There are two things. And here it says one thing is enough.
Correct.
So
what he's saying is the emptiness of person is the same emptiness as phenomena.
That's what he said. Yeah, I remember that. But which is it for all the tenets?
No, I mean, actually the word emptiness, I mean, you won't see that in the two lower schools, the Vaibhashika, Sautrantika. You will see it in Chittamatra school, but the word emptiness there means something different. It doesn't mean the same thing.
No, that's why not.
Right, one last presentation. We talked about the two extremes. We talked about the two extremes in terms of philosophical view, the extreme of existence and non-existence. How do we overcome that extreme of existence? What's the solution to the extreme of existence, of grasping onto everything independent? Emptiness. What's the antidote or solution to the extreme of non-existence or nihilism? Dependent arising. But we can also talk about two extremes from other perspectives. Another perspective is with respect to meditation. And we see this in shamatha practice. So what are the two extremes in meditation in shamatha practice? Laxity and excitation, or dullness and distraction? And how do we overcome those two extremes? How do we overcome dullness? What do we should do to overcome dullness? Sharpen our focus, or tighten. And what about distraction, but particularly in terms of agitation, tension? Relax, release, loosen. And we saw that in the shamatha part of the text. In fact, it said, if we go back, this is from 2 years ago, of course, but it says, if your focus is too tight and you think excitement is arising, relax it a little. If your focus is too loose and you think that laxity is arising, tighten it a little. By finding a balance between the two, the mind is drawn away from the movement of thoughts. But we can also talk about extremes in terms of conduct. What are the two extremes in terms of conduct? And this is exemplified actually by the life of Prince Siddhartha. He went to two extremes, remember?
I'm guessing it's like self-sacrifice.
Yeah, so that was the second thing. What was the first thing he did? Indulgence, yeah. And of course the other one was the asceticism. To overcome this, he went to the ascetic practices. So how did he overcome indulgence? Yeah, but what was the initial thing? Why was he stuck there? Why was he indulgence? Why? Because he felt that those things were the source of happiness. So how do you overcome that? What insight helps us to overcome that? Exactly, first noble truth, the truth of dukkha or suffering. To understand that the source of happiness is not out there. How do we overcome asceticism? Because what was asceticism? He believed that the source of suffering was what? His body. Second noble truth. By understanding the causes of suffering, you can overcome ascetic. The causes is not the body, it's our mental afflictions. So therefore, ascetic practices are not going to help with that.